Hello virtual pilots, iFlyFlightSims here. Welcome back to the channel. Do you have a VR headset and are you wondering how to get the best possible performance with it in DCS? Well, I'd like to show you all exactly how I maintain a stable 72 FPS in most situations without sacrificing visual quality. In this video, we'll be going over the settings that I have in the NVIDIA app, the Pimax Play app, and in DCS. Currently, my setup includes an NVIDIA RTX 5080 GPU, an i7-14700K processor, and 96GB of DDR5 RAM. You can find my complete setup information in the video description below. Now before we get started, I just want to send out a thank you to Pimax for sending me a Pimax Crystal Super QLED VR headset for free, which I used to make this video. I also want to let all of you watching this video know that you can receive a discount on your Pimax purchase by clicking on one of the affiliate links in the video comments or description below, and then entering the discount code iFlyFlightSims at checkout. I receive a small commission on those purchases, and this is one way that you can support my channel. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll begin by going over the settings that I use in the NVIDIA control panel. Okay, so we're going to go over the settings I have configured here in the NVIDIA app. So I'm going to come over here to the drivers tab, and this is the driver I'm currently on, which is 591.74, which was released Monday, January 5th. And the reason I updated to this driver is to use the newer DLSS transformers that were added, which is the NVIDIA DLSS 4.5. So there are some newer transformer models, and you can only use those by updating to the latest driver version. So make sure that you've updated to the latest NVIDIA driver. Next, I'm going to go over here to the graphics tab, and we'll start with the global settings. So this applies to all programs. Here you can see what I have set up. If you want to know what a particular setting does, you can click on the little eye icon, and that kind of gives you a description of what it does. So this is just what I have configured for every situation. I'm not using the RTX dynamic vibrance. This just adds color, additional color options using AI, but it's going to cost performance, so I leave that off. I have the RTX 5080 selected as GPU. Now DLSS, that's going to be dependent on the game, so I have different settings for each game, so I just leave it on 3D app setting by default. DSR factors, this allows you to configure a higher resolution than your monitor supports, then downscale it. So again, this has a performance cost, so I leave that off. Smooth motion, this applies to games that don't support DLSS, so because DLSS is used by DCS, we don't need to be using smooth motion. Next, I have low latency mode. I have that turned on. Image scaling off. Max frame rate off. Monitor technology G-Sync for 2D. But for VR, I go with fixed refresh, as VR doesn't support G-Sync at this time. OpenGL Vulkan, leave that on auto. Power management mode is on maximum performance. And then we have the shader cache size. I recommend setting this to 10 gigabytes, but you can set it to more or less according to your preference. You can also do unlimited, but I find that 10 gigabytes works great for me. And here's kind of the description of what it does. So it just controls disk space that the driver could use for storing shader compiles. Next, vertical sync, 3D app setting, and then virtual reality variable rate super sampling. I have that one turned off as it applies to MSAA programs, but because DCS is using DLSS, I have that turned off because we're not going to be using MSAA. Here you can see the legacy settings. So these ones typically don't affect DirectX 11 or deferred rendering programs. So if it's an older program like DirectX 9, these settings will have an effect on it. And so this is just kind of what I have. It's mostly pretty much just the default settings there. Next, we're going to go over to program settings and then select DCS World here in the list of programs. I have RTX Dynamic Vibrance turned off. GPU selected is my RTX 5080. And then next we have the DLSS settings. So whatever you choose here is going to override the setting within DCS. And that includes the model presets, the transformer model, as well as the overrides. So there's no longer a need to use DLSS Swapper because you can just override this directly from the driver settings. So first setting here, the model presets, this allows you to choose the DLSS model that's being used, or you can use the one that comes with the game. I'd recommend just to go ahead and override and use the latest here. And so here it kind of gives a little description here of what DCS World supports and does not support. So I'd go ahead and set this one here to latest, and that way the NVIDIA driver will automatically choose the best and the latest DLSS transformer to use depending on your setting for super resolution. So if you choose latest, it's not always going to choose like the K, the L, the M transformer models, so it's not always going to choose the highest letter. It's going to automatically select whichever letter is the latest and the best supported for your super resolution setting. So the letter that it uses could vary depending on what you choose here. So I would just leave this on latest and then let the driver choose which model to use. Frame generation is not currently supported by DCS. And next we have this super resolution setting. So whatever setting we choose here is going to override the setting that we choose in DCS. So I'll go ahead and prove that to you. So right now I have this set to quality. I also have DCS set to quality as well, but I'm going to go ahead and change this one here to performance. Then we're going to launch the game. And then as you can see in the gameplay footage that's playing, the override has set the DLSS super resolution to performance, and the model preset being used is preset M. Okay, so that has overridden the quality setting in the DCS settings. And now coming back to the NVIDIA settings, we're going to go ahead and set this to quality, as I find this one to be the best for me in my setup, but if you have issues with performance, you can certainly lower it, and that will give you a few extra frames at the cost of some visual fidelity and a little bit of blurring. So I leave this set to quality. Next we have our DSR factors, so I don't use this as it has a performance cost, and this just allows you to upscale the 2D resolution. I really don't think that the Pimax headset needs DSR, as it already has a very high resolution built in. Next we have smooth motion. Again, this is for games that don't support DLSS, so because DCS is using this, we're going to leave smooth motion turned off. Next we have low latency mode here. So this allows us to reduce latency by limiting the number of frames the CPU prepares before those frames are then processed by the GPU. So I have this set to Ultra to fully prioritize latency, which minimizes the queued frames. So I find this gives me the least number of stutters in VR is by leaving this turned on to Ultra. Next up we have image scaling. So this again is kind of going in the line of upscaling the resolution of the 2D image. There's a setting in the Pimax control panel that also does kind of a similar thing, the NVIDIA image scaling, so it can improve visual fidelity, but if you're using DLSS, this setting is kind of redundant, so I don't use image scaling. Next we have max frame rate. I leave that turned off, and the frame rate instead is limited in the Pimax headset and in DCS's settings. For monitor technology, I have this on fixed refresh, so although I have a G-Sync monitor, because I'm using VR headsets, G-Sync does not work well with VR. I'm not sure if it even works at all, so I just leave this on fixed refresh. And next for OpenGL and Vulkan, leave that to auto. Power management mode to prefer maximum performance. And then I have vertical sync turned off, as I allow the headset to manage that. And then again, variable rate supersampling, because DCS is not using MSAA, I have that turned off. Instead I'm using DLSS. I leave this setting off as we don't need it. And then here I'll show you my legacy settings. So for the most part, these aren't going to have effect on deferred render programs, but I have noticed at least the anisotropic filtering setting does do something. So that's really the only setting that I have modified here. here, if we were using like multi-sample anti-aliasing, we could turn on this setting so that this worked in DCS a long time ago. But now with the DLSS, this MFA is no longer needed, as well as the transparency not needed, because these are all legacy settings for multi-sample anti-aliasing. So the only settings I have modified here are just the anisotropic sample optimization. So this just kind of gives you a little bit extra FPS. I leave that turned on. And then for the negative LOD bias, this is for texture filtering, so I leave that on clamp, just to give the best possible textures in DCS world, but you can certainly set that to allow to give you a little bit extra FPS if you're trying to squeeze as much performance as you can out of DCS with your hardware. And then also these optimizations here, trilinear optimization for anisotropic filtering, I leave that turned on, as I find that it doesn't have that much of a visual impact, but it is, in VR you need every bit of FPS you can get. So the only setting here that I really focus on quality is just going to be that negative LOD bias setting. I find clamp gives the best visual fidelity for spotting your craft. Alright, and in the next section we're going to go over the settings that I have in DCS. Alright, so now we're going to go over the DCS settings that I have in the launcher. So I recommend using the launcher, as it allows you to adjust your settings before booting into the game, and you can also use this little setting over here on the right to switch between VR and 2D. So this setting here is configured for VR. You can switch back and forth to 2D. Maybe you need to review a track or create a mission without having your VR headset on, so this allows you to switch between those two pretty seamlessly. Alright, so we're going to go over here to settings. So here we have the system options. So you can hover over any of these settings to get a description of what it does. And if there is a description available, you'll see it appear in a little orange box. We're going to start with the resolution up here. This has a significant GPU performance cost, but this is again for the 2D resolution. So what you set here doesn't matter as much, as you're going to be running it in VR, which has a different resolution available possibly than your monitor. So this is just what I have for 2D. Next, you can configure multiple monitors here with this toggle option here. It supports up to 3 monitors for ultra-wide. You can set 2 monitors here, and you can also configure to have one of your MFDs displayed on an additional monitor. Next, we have the cockpit displays resolution setting. So I have this configured to 1024, which is the highest available. This will give you the best clarity on your cockpit displays. And then to save performance on the cockpit displays, I would turn this next setting off here. So with that setting toggled off, basically the cockpit displays are not going to be rendering at every single frame. They'll render at every other frame, so it reduces the amount of performance cost from this display's resolution setting. Next, we have the mirrors resolution. So same idea as the cockpit displays. This just affects the quality of the mirrors. So I have this one turned down a bit, as I don't need as much sharpness on the mirrors themselves. There's much clarity on those, and they do have a pretty huge performance cost. And like the cockpit displays, you can turn off this setting here so that the mirrors don't render every single frame. And then an additional performance saver here is the mirror sequential rendering. So again, this is really useful to help you save on those frames per second. Next, we have our anti-aliasing setting. So I have this one configured to DLAA. So in order to use any kind of DLSS in DCS world, you will need to have your anti-aliasing set to DLAA. Next, we have our upscaling setting. So this upscales your image to a higher resolution, so basically saving you on performance and then also enhancing the quality depending on what you choose for the upscaling settings. So DLSS would be what I recommend if you have an NVIDIA card, and then we have some older upscaling settings here, as well as one for AMD cards. So we have FSR for AMD, and then NIS, which was the NVIDIA image scaling, but it is inferior to DLSS. So I would use DLSS if you're using an NVIDIA card. Next up, we have the DLSS setting. So I happen to have this one set to quality, but recall that in the NVIDIA driver settings, it's going to override whatever I choose here in DCS. So you can just leave this one on quality and then configure the DLSS setting inside of your NVIDIA app to override the setting here. Next, we have sharpening here. So this just affects the visual detail to improve visuals after upscaling. I have the sharpening set up in the Pimax settings, so I just leave this off in DCS, that way it's not doing double. Next we have our textures here, so this affects the texture quality for units, and I have that set to the highest setting. Terrain textures as well, set to the highest setting, so quality of the terrain textures. Now shadows. Shadows are a significant performance hit, so this one I have set to medium. If you're in 2D, you can probably set this to high, but in VR, the shadows have a significant performance cost, so I have this turned down to medium. Flat shadows blur turned on, secondary shadows turned on, screen space shadows turned on. Visibility range here, this is a very large CPU and GPU hit, so in 2D you may be able to get away with the higher visibility range, but in VR you may need to lower this to improve on frames per second, so I have this one set to high. So civilian traffic will affect your CPU usage. I would set this minimum to low. You can turn this off really to save on performance, but if you're playing like World War II maps where you're trying to hunt trains, sometimes those trains won't render in if you don't have civilian traffic turned on. So I leave that one turned on to low. Clouds configured to ultra. They particularly don't look as good if you lower the quality while in VR, so definitely recommend leaving this one on ultra. Water set to high. Screen space ambient occlusion set to low. So what that does is it affects the real-time screen space ambient occlusion, so it is a large GPU hit if you set that to high. Next we have SSLR, so this affects the quality of local reflections within screen space, so think carrier decks or wet runways, so that one you're going to want to leave turned on. Lens effects, I have that turned off. You really don't want to use lens effects in VR. Heat blur set to low, again to save on performance. And then we have motion blur here turned off. I would recommend just turning this off for VR. You don't want any kind of motion blur in VR. Depth of field also turned off again for VR. This would be useful for screenshots. It does have a performance cost, so I would leave that turned off for VR. Here you can choose what format you'd like DCS to save your screenshots in. And then there's some color grading filters. If you'd like to apply those, I leave those just turned off. Here you have the intensity of the canopy reflections, so higher is more intensity, lower is less intense. Followed by volumetric lights, so I would leave this on if you can. It does have some performance cost, but it does make the game look a lot more realistic, especially with light refraction in clouds and in fog, so definitely I would leave that on if you can. Coming over here to the right, we have additional settings here for clutter and grass, so mainly affects CPU usage, so I have that turned on to 750. Forest visibility turned to 80, details factor set to 100, or set to 1 here for forest details factor. Scenery details also set to 1. Preload radius, this is the distance at which the terrain data is preloaded into memory, so if you have a lot of RAM, you can scale this all the way up. So I have 96 gigabytes of RAM, hence I'm using the max setting for preload radius. Chimney smoke, I find that there's a significant performance hit when that turned on, so I just leave that off. Gamma, this is going to be user preference, so just affects the brightness of the screen. External field of view, so you can use this to adjust your default zoom level when going into the external views. And then LOD switch factor, so I leave this one turned on at 0.9. It does have a performance cost if you increase it, as it allows you to see those details sooner. So I lower this to save on some frames. Next we have the max FPS, so I'd recommend not increasing this above the refresh rate you're planning to use in the Pimax headset. So whatever stable frames you can get in your Pimax, just set your max FPS accordingly. So right now I'm running it at 72 FPS stable, so I have DCS set to 75 as this moves in increments of 5. Anisotropic filtering, there is a moderate GPU hit, but I think it's worth it as it gives you sharper textures like on the runway and taxiway, so I leave that one turned all the way up. Terrain, object shadows, so leave that on default. Just basically it's the render mechanic for shadows, but if you really need to save on performance here, you can lower this one to flat or turn it off entirely. Cockpits, global illumination, definitely a must for VR and making your cockpits look realistic, so I'll leave that turned on. Followed by the font scale, GUI scale, so this is just scale of text. Rain droplets, definitely a must to be able to see those high quality rain droplets, so I have that turned on high. VSync turned off, this is managed by the headset. And then full screen, I leave that turned on for this is for the 2D mirror. I recommend leaving that one turned on. And then cursor confined to game window, have that turned off. So this is just up to you if you're going to be multitasking while playing DCS. Maybe you're recording footage in OBS Studio. In that case, you want to turn this off so that way you can manage the OBS settings. Now coming down here are the VR settings for DCS. So first of all, if you're going to use VR, you need to turn this on here to enable use of the headset, followed by the pixel density. So there's no need to adjust this. Just leave it on the 1.0 default, as you can adjust the quality of the image directly in the Pimax app. So that's where I would do it. So just leave this one on 1. Definitely use mouse if you plan on using your mouse in VR, and then make sure to turn on the cursor confined to game window. So you'll notice I have this turned off in 2D, but I have it turned on in VR. You don't want your cursor wandering outside of your VR view. Losing your mouse is kind of a problem in VR. You don't want that happening, so go ahead and toggle this on. Next we have force IPD distance. So this relates to the IPD setting that you have, and so you can configure IPD in Pimax as well. But for DCS, this just affects the distance of objects, so I would just leave this one on and set it to 64. And then configure your actual IPD within the Pimax settings itself. Next, bloom effect, I leave that turned off, not needed for VR. This will allow you to use the built-in audio device of your VR headset. If you plan on using it, or if you're using a separate pair of headphones, just turn this off. Here you can configure the MSA mask size. I'm not using that, so I just kind of left it where it was. And I have the HMD mask turned off as it's not needed. Next we have use DCS system resolution. So if you turn this on, this just affects the size of the 2D mirror that's being shown on your monitor. So if you select this one, you can get a larger 2D mirror on your monitor. Can make it easier in some cases with capturing footage. So this is really up to you. Play around with it, see what you like. I leave that turned off. Again, this is more settings here for the 2D mirror. So for the DCS 2D mirror, you can set to left eye, right eye, or you can have them both side by side. So I leave it on left eye to capture footage. Next, you can use crop source to rectangle here. So basically, your FOV in VR is a lot more than you get in a 2D monitor. So when recording that footage and bringing it over to YouTube, it does have to be cropped. So you can set this here so that DCS will auto crop it for you, or leave it turned off. Just record the footage and then crop it yourself. So I leave this turned off just so I can have more control over how that image is cropped. Next, if you have a Pimax Crystal Super with QuadViews, you are going to want to turn on these next two settings here. This is really the selling point or the game changer for the Pimax Crystal Super headsets. So definitely I would use QuadViews, leave that turned on, and eye tracking turned on. So that way when you enable QuadViews and eye tracking in the Pimax headsets, then DCS will also be able to use them. Over here on the right, you have the options for hand controllers. If you have a HOTAS setup, you may not want to use them, so I don't use hand controllers for that reason, as I use my HOTAS, so I have that turned off. but if you wanted to go ahead and use those hand controllers, you can by toggling on the settings over here on the right. Alright, the last note I want to make here for the DCS settings is these little presets here. So here, this allows you to configure the launcher window size, and whether you want to turn that on or off. I would recommend leaving the launcher turned on, so that way you can adjust these settings before you boot into game. You can toggle the DCS version on or off. And next you have these presets. So these are a good starting point if you're not sure where to start with your settings. You can use one of these presets to kind of fill everything in for you, and then just adjust from there. So if you're just now trying out VR, I would start here with the VR setting, and then just adjust from there. Or if you're in 2D and you know your hardware really well, you can go ahead and select low, medium, or high, and then adjust individual settings as needed. Once you have your settings adjusted here and set up, you can save a preset here by clicking on this little save button. So right now I only have 2 presets, but if I wanted to save this right here as a new preset, I could click on save, and then that would add it as the 3rd preset. And then once that preset is saved, you can just toggle back and forth between those presets by clicking on the icons, and then you click the little apply button to apply any settings you have made. So if you adjust any settings, or if you adjust a new preset, click on the apply button to then save those settings. Alright, next we're going to go over the Pimax Play settings here that I'm using. So we opened up the Pimax app, we're going to go over here to settings, and just make sure that you're on the latest version. So as of the time I'm recording this is the version of the Pimax Play app that I'm using. You click on check for updates here to check for a newer version. And then here you have options to opt in to test versions, start automatically, start minimize, etc. So just some additional settings here. We're going to go over to adjust these settings in the headset itself next. So to do that, I'm going to click on this Pimax Crystal Super button. And in order to adjust any settings on the VR headset itself, your headset does need to be plugged in and turned on. So you may need to wait for a bit while it's turning on once you come over here to this screen. And then once your headset is powered up, you're going to see this icon turn green. And so now that the headset is plugged in and turned on, we can adjust the settings by clicking on this device settings button right here. So here we have the device information tab. So in the device information tab, you can see the headset firmware version. So if there's an update available, just click on HMD updates to download new firmware. And then here you can see the optic engine information. And let's scroll down here to the tracking settings. So here under tracking settings, you can first you'll set the room lighting frequency. So you can leave that on auto or set that manually according to your preference. Next, you have this recline mode setting. So this will actually turn off any track movement, so make sure to leave that turned off. Followed by the refresh rate. So again, you're going to want to set whatever your stable FPS is going to be in DCS. So I've chosen 72 as that is the stable FPS I can maintain. For an RTX 5090 and higher, you may get away with setting this to 90. You have some screen timeout settings here, so you allow that screen to turn off automatically, followed by the brightness setting here. So the headset is already pretty bright, so I leave that configured to 80. Here you can adjust the light bar color. So that's the color of the light bar on the front part of the headset. So you can either choose blue, green, or you can give it a custom color. Next, we have eye tracking. So you are going to want to turn this on to enable QuadViews in DCS, so make sure eye tracking is enabled. This setting here is primarily for VR chat, so it allows the headset to transmit the position of where your pupils and your eyes are looking. So you'll want to go ahead and turn that on if you're using VR chat, but this doesn't have any application in DCS, so I go ahead and leave this turned off. Before you use eye tracking for the first time, you're going to want to calibrate it by clicking on the calibration button. Next, I find this useful to have the wearing location reminder turned on, so in case you move out of the pre-configured play area, it'll give you a little warning message, so make sure to leave that on. Next is your IPD adjustment. So this is just going to be depending on what your IPD is. You can get that from an optician or measure it yourself. And then just go ahead and enter in your IPD and the headset will adjust for you. Here you can adjust the handle vibration, and that's pretty much all the settings here that apply here to DCS. So if you're planning on using the headset as your audio device, you can go ahead and toggle this on. Let's go to advanced, and here you can adjust offset settings of the image. For the most part, I leave this all on default. This is also a useful setting right here. So pass through. There are some situations where you need to look at your keyboard in DCS, and it's impractical to take off the headset, so leave this turned on, and you can then just enable the pass through by double tapping the side of your HMD with your finger. Next we have the chaperone, so I leave that one turned on. Let's go to the game settings here. So we're gonna go over here to games, start with common settings. So common setting will apply to all games, but you can also configure individual games. So we're gonna go ahead and configure DCS here. And we can enable DCS's program settings by ticking this box here. However, those program settings we apply here are not going to take effect in DCS unless we have this checked, and unless if we start the game from the Pimax Play app. So you can do that one of two ways. Either click this start button to start the game, or you can go over here to My Assets, find the game here, and then click the start button here. If your DCS doesn't display image here, it may look like just a generic image. If you have a standalone launcher, Mouse has a useful tutorial on how to enable this image. So going back to the headset settings here for DCS, you have your FOV setting, so I leave that on normal. Image quality, I leave that on auto, but you can certainly adjust this, so you can customize to get higher image quality if you like. Next we have GPU upscaling. So this upscales your GPU, so will improve performance at higher settings, but it will reduce image quality. So that this is a way to gain some extra FPS, but I find just leaving this off works best for me as I use DLSS. Next you have sharpness. So here you can adjust and set a sharpness amount within the Pimax app. So next up we have this dynamic foveated rendering setting. This right here is the game changer for the Pimax Crystal Super headsets, as it allows you to render the entire image at a lower resolution and then render the higher resolution at the parts of the screen you're looking at. So this is a great way to increase performance without sacrificing the visual fidelity. So I find this really useful in making DCS VR playable. So to turn on QuadViews, you'll want to check this box here. And there are some preset settings that you can choose from here, but I find that these settings work great for me for recording. So let me make a couple of notes here. So these two right here, the horizontal gaze area size and vertical, affects the size of the high resolution box. So the higher you have this number set, the bigger the box is going to be. So it's going to be more difficult to notice that box the higher the gaze area is set to, but at the same time you're now increasing the view area of the high resolution part of the screen, so it's going to have a performance cost. So I find 15 works great for me. Next you have the gaze area resolution. So this is the resolution of the part of the screen you're looking at. So wherever your eyes are looking, that's the resolution it's going to render at. So you can increase this beyond 100%. Again, keep it in mind, it's going to have a significant performance cost, but I find it just fine leaving this on 100%. Then next you have the peripheral area resolution. So this is basically the background resolution that's rendered. So this affects your peripherals, of course, based on the name, but the other kind of unknown effect it has is if you're planning on recording video footage or capturing video footage in OBS Studio, you may notice that your recordings are blurry or have a low resolution. So if that's the case, you'll want to go ahead and adjust this peripheral area resolution setting, and this will improve the quality of your recordings. But keep in mind that the higher this number is, the more it's going to cost in performance. So what you're able to get away with is really going to just depend on the GPU you have. So if you have an RTX 5090 or higher, you could probably set this to 50% or even higher. But for me, on an RTX 5080, I leave this on 30%, and this is just for when recording, but when playing VR, just for smooth experience, I lower this to around 20. So again, this can help you save on performance by lowering the percentage, whereas increasing it improves the area in periphery that you see. It increases the resolution of that, but it's going to have a significant performance cost. This next setting here is the Pimax Central Priority Rendering, so this isn't needed if you are using QuadViews, but if your game does not support QuadViews, you can try this Pimax Central Priority Rendering to kind of do this similar rendering technique, which can help save on performance without sacrificing quality. Next, you have lock to half frame rate. This is mainly to prevent screen tearing. I leave that turned off. Hidden area mask. This is also good for performance gains, so I leave that turned on. And then Vive compatibility if you need that compatibility. Then finally, you have color options to adjust the contrast and brightness of the screen that is displayed. Alright, and so those are the settings for the Pimax Play app. In conclusion, these settings should result in about 72 FPS in most situations when running DCS and VR. Keep in mind that your performance may vary if your hardware is different from mine, so you may need to tweak these settings on your own and find out what works best on your setup. If you're not recording gameplay footage, you can lower the peripheral area resolution setting in Pimax Play to gain some performance without it affecting your overall experience. If you decide to start recording VR gameplay, you can either increase this setting and accept that you will lose some FPS, or you can try your luck with the DCS track recordings. Additionally, game updates and driver updates can change performance, so make sure to follow any updates from NVIDIA and Eagle Dynamics as features are added. I hope that you found this guide helpful, and if there's anything else I should have mentioned, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. Finally, if you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe for more content. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you'd like to support my channel directly, consider signing up as a member for early access to my videos and other perks. If you'd like to purchase a Pimax Crystal Light or Super, please consider using my affiliate link and discount code in the video description. Thanks again for watching. See you all in the virtual skies.